This is The Clash, where the real world clashes with a true Christian worldview. Join former professional wrestler Chris Whaley, known as the Masked Saint, who is an author, pastor, and teacher that brings his wrestling skills into the squared circle and tackles real-life issues. Along with Jeff Dixon, best-selling author, internationally known teacher, leader, and pastor who is not afraid to tackle the tough issues of the world we live in. Together they form a tag team of wisdom in The Clash.
Hi, welcome once again to The Clash. My name is Jeff Dixon. I'm joined by
Chris Whaley.
And together we're going to take our Christian worldview and allow it to clash into the culture that we live in and see if at the end of it we can make sense of everything. Now, Chris, you got to forgive me though. I don't know what this episode is about. What are we talking about?
Forgiveness.
Oh, the forgiveness episode.
That's exactly right.
Well, then hopefully Chris will forgive me for forgetting that. And hopefully you'll stay with us because right after this break, we're going to talk about forgiveness. And we're going to begin by talking about what it is. Good to know, right?
Absolutely.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hey, it's me again, and I just wanted to take a moment and invite you to check something out. It doesn't cost you a dime, but I think that it's something you might really enjoy. The Church at 434, where I'm the pastor, where Chris Whaley is on staff, we have an app, and that app is absolutely free. You can find it by going to the App Store for iPhones. Just type in the Church at 434, or go to Google Play for Android phones. Again, the Church at 434. And when you get there, you're going to find a number of resources that are designed just for you to encourage you in your spiritual growth, in your walk with Christ. There's going to be some things that will entertain you, that you'll laugh at, that will be fun. And you can also tap in and watch our worship services. You can see some of the films that we've made. You can see some of the activities that we've got. And you can connect to the ministry of the Church of 434, where Chris and I are a part of that on a weekly basis. And we would love for you to join us and become a part of that network with us. And so check out the Church at 434 app in the App Store or in Google Play. And you can visit with us there. Also, you can email us right through that app, and we'd love to hear from you. Just say, hey, I got the app, and I like it. If you get the app and you don't like it, we don't want to hear from you. But that's a whole different thing. Let's get back to the clash. Hey, thanks for coming back. We're talking about forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And in this particular segment, we're going to talk about what it is. Right. So, Chris, have you kind of give us a thought or two about how do we know what it is? How do we see what it is?
Yeah, I love that story. I don't love the story. It's an amazing story about Corrie ten Boom, who her dad was a watchmaker. I guess the dad, the sister, and her, they're put into concentration camps. Father died, the sister died. Just horrible conditions, the way they were treated by the guards, everybody. And Corrie ten Boom lived by the truth of Psalm 27, verses 12 through 14. False witnesses rise up against me, breathing out violence. I'm still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Well, the war is over and Corrie ten Boom is speaking in Germany. And she talked about her time in the concentration camp, named the concentration camp, and then afterwards, this guy came up to her and said, I heard the word Ravensbrück. I was a guard there. And then she immediately recognized him. And then he told her he had become a Christian. And he said, I know that God has forgiven me, but I would love to hear it from your lips. Will you forgive me? And that story was just so captivating. Of course she did forgive him and all. But forgiveness, Jeff, I don't think there's a bigger issue in the church than the issue of forgiveness. Have you dealt with any of that? You been betrayed? You had any?
Yeah, certainly not. Don't want to call anybody out on television, but there have been folks who have not only disappointed, but really done some things that were just hurtful, mean, spiteful. And it really does cause you to kind of catch your breath just a little bit. And after you get past that, what just happened or why did you do that? Then to start processing and dealing with those feelings of hurt and betrayal and anger and bitterness if you're not careful. I mean, all those things that start welling up because, I mean, you basically have a relationship or someone that you love or care about that has hurt you in some way. And it immediately kind of throws back on you this need. What do I do now?
Yeah.
How do I react? And so, I mean, I think it certainly has happened to me. Situations where I felt that to move forward or to get on with life, I was going to have to forgive. I mean, have you experienced that as well?
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you said that about, I don't know if I want to share that on television because, I've got several. I mean, some of the things that have happened. You know, when I went into the ministry, I was a little bit naive. I'm thinking I'm going to be in armor with a sword on the front stoop of the church fighting evil, trying to get into the church. And then I was so shocked to find out that my biggest battle was not outside the church. My biggest battle was inside the church.
Sure.
And I think so many people, and probably people in the audience that are watching, that some of the greatest hurts that I've experienced have happened inside the church.
Sure. Well, you know, the church is the bride of Christ, and sometimes when you pull back that veil, she's ugly. I mean, it can be ugly. Yeah. So, it does happen.
What is forgiveness, Jeff?
Well, you know, forgiveness is that. I mean, there's a lot of ways, I guess, to define it, but ultimately, Jesus models it for us. But forgiveness is that moment that we're willing to let go of the hurt or the emotion or all of that stuff that comes along with being hurt. That would rob us from the joy of being who God has created us to be. Now, I mean that's a big 10,000 view, hyper spiritual look at it. But
right.
in some ways, I mean that kind of hits it. I mean, there's more practical ways of looking at it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I came up with this. Assume you need to borrow $100 to help pay a medical bill, and so you ask this friend for a loan. Promise to pay it back at the end of the month if you can just loan this to me. But then the time comes for repayment and you don't have the money. In fact, for the next 3 months, you still don't have the money. And then unexpectedly, out of the kindness of his heart, your friend chooses to forgive the debt. And I think that's one of the one facet of forgiveness. The Bible says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, Romans 13:8. So I think that's the first thing, Jeff. True forgiveness dismisses the debt. When you grant forgiveness, you dismiss the debt that is owed you.
Yeah.
Can you think of another?
Well, one of my rules for life is that when it comes to other people, we can't fix them. We just have to forgive them.
Right.
Okay. I mean, we can't fix them. I can't make anybody do anything different.
That's true.
I do have to forgive them. Interesting passage of scripture, Ephesians 4:26 and 27. While it doesn't mention forgiveness, it's all about forgiveness.
Okay.
It says this: don't let the sun go down on your anger, and don't give the devil an opportunity.
Right.
Now, the word opportunity there comes from a Greek word, and Chris will know this because he remembers seminary. It's from a Greek word, topos, T-O-P-O-S, which is where we get our English word topography, and it means territory or ground. And so what it's actually saying is that when you are angry, you give up ground in your life to the devil. And when the devil begins to gobble up ground, he begins to occupy a space in your heart. And before you know it, he's moving in on a bunk bed. I mean, he starts living there, and he will stink up the place if we let him. And that's where forgiveness comes along, because we have to evict the devil. We have to get him out of there. We need to tell him to pick up his bags and hit the road. And whatever that is that has made us angry, we have to be able somehow to forgive it.
Right.
And not keep a list of wrongs, and not allow that to start defining us, and not allow the hurt to mold who we're getting ready to be. And I think for us, we forget that sometimes forgiveness is really not about the other person.
Right.
Forgiveness is about us. And how I choose, based on my relationship with Christ, to deal with you, or you, or you, or you, or you, whoever it is.
Right.
That's where forgiveness really does come into play.
Yeah.
So forgiveness is a very personal thing that we all have to deal with.
Yeah, I love that verse that you used from Ephesians 4. My wife and I have tried to do that. We've been married over 49 years, and so, don't let the sun go down on your anger. So we don't want to go to bed at night mad with each other. And I tell you, Jeff, there's been some nights we didn't go to bed till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was just lasted. No, I'm just kidding about
You're tired. Is that what you're saying? You're just
Right.
tired. Yeah.
Well, another thing, Jeff, also is forgiveness is dismissing your demand that others owe you something, especially when they fail to meet your expectations.
Sure.
And they fail to keep a promise, or they fail to treat you justly. And Jesus said, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. I mean, have you ever done that?
It's tough. Hard.
Yeah. Well, I think, another one, forgiveness is the act of dismissing. It is the act of canceling or setting someone free from the consequences of falling short of God's standards.
Yeah.
And I know how that, the holy standard of God is what? Perfection.
Right.
And yet we've all sinned, and the penalty for our sin is spiritual death, which is separation from God. But the penalty for our sin, which is our debt, was paid by Jesus through his sacrificial death on the cross. And so instead of being separated from God, we can have our debt dismissed by God and experience that eternal life in heaven. So when we're never more like God, Jeff, than when we're forgiving somebody.
And I think that sometimes we hear people say this. I've heard people say it. You hear people say it. I mean, it's one of those things where, well, this has happened to me. I can never forgive that. We forget, and I think that one of the things we have to learn as followers, especially, is that forgiveness, just like love, is a choice, not a feeling.
Right.
Because forgiveness isn't necessarily something that when you're forgiving him, you're feeling any better.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't make the hurt go away. But forgiveness is a choice, and you nailed it. In that moment, we're most like God. And so we have to decide that it's going to be a part of our character, a part of our life, to be willing to forgive.
Right.
And if you don't forgive, you're making a conscious choice not to do what we're supposed to do.
Absolutely.
And so then all of a sudden, because someone has wronged you or done something to you, and if your reaction is not to forgive, you've created a problem for yourself that is bigger than the original problem.
Right.
Because now there is a sin issue. And the sin is you're not willing to forgive.
Right.
And that becomes then something that you've got to wrestle through and will eat you alive. We come back to what I said earlier. I mean, the devil starts stinking up the place then because you're just being disobedient.
Yeah. I'm paraphrasing it. Doesn't it say also, if we're not willing to forgive someone, God's not going to forgive us?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes the application, the implication of that is terrifying. The application of that looks a lot rougher in our lives than any of us want to admit, because I think most people have folks out there in their orbit that, they have a hard time forgiving, and I think that it's a big topic.
It is.
Big topic. Well, we've been talking about what it is.
Okay.
We're going to talk about what it's not, and kind of hopefully cut through some of the clutter about this right after the break. So don't go away. And if you have to leave, we'll forgive you, but not this week. Maybe next week. But come back after the break.
There you go. I love hearing from our listeners. I have a website called themaskedsaint.com, and I get people telling me things about the old wrestling days. I love to hear from them. I'm on Facebook, I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, and I just never get tired of listening to people. And if you have not read The Masked Saint, I have that available on my website. I have the Christmas book, Harold's Heavenly Christmas. I have the last book that I wrote with a wrestling buddy called Mr. President. Pictures whenever I was still in good shape. I have those available along with t-shirts, anything, but most of all, just love to hear from you.
Well, we are back, and we are talking about forgiveness, and the fact that our audience came back. That's a good sign, I think. So we didn't mess everything up so bad that they can't forgive us.
Yeah.
But we talked about what forgiveness is, and we gave some illustrations of that and kind of had a conversation about that. Sometimes we don't understand forgiveness very well, though. How can we do that better? What is it not, I guess, is the way of looking at that.
Well, there are all kinds of, I think, misconceptions about forgiveness. I mean, some think forgiveness is the equivalent of excusing sin, saying, that it wasn't wrong, now it's okay, which is wrong. Yet, when Jesus encountered the mob of men that were eager to stone the woman who was caught in adultery, Jesus didn't excuse her. He said, go and sin no more, which is you don't make sin a way of life. So to help correct the confusion, I think we need to know what forgiveness is not. That's a great question. So what is your first forgiveness?
Well, I would jump off what you said just a little bit. I mean, forgiveness is not an excuse to ignore an offense. In other words, we know that something has happened, and again, we come back. I think we used the word in the first segment. It's a choice, right? It's choosing to change your attitude toward the offender. Okay, you've hurt me. Now I've got to make a choice about how I'm going to deal with you. And it doesn't mean that you don't deal with them differently. It doesn't mean that everything is the same, but you're making a conscious choice not to strike or harm back or to repay them for what they've done because you value living at peace.
Right.
And so when you're forgiving, it's not ignoring what's happened. And sometimes I think that sometimes people feel like, well, if I forgive, that makes me weak. That's not. It makes you incredibly strong.
Right.
Because forgiveness is never ignoring what has happened. That's not it at all.
Right.
We're back to the choice again.
Right. And forgiveness is not waiting for time to heal all wounds, because, Jeff, time does not heal all wounds, because, to be honest with you, there are some people that will not allow healing to take place.
Right.
So I don't know if you've ever been up against that, where you come to that point, you go to the person, and you say, hey, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and they refuse to forgive you.
Yeah, and that is their choice, right? And they choose to live with unforgiveness. Yeah, I think that sometimes we get our verbiage kind of screwed up, and maybe it gets our heads a little wonky too. I like that, head's a little bit wonky. But forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things.
Two different things.
Right. We forgive because Jesus tells us to forgive.
Right.
And so in that, and the fact that he has forgiven us, that reconciles us with him. Okay. So God does that reconciliation work. But when you forgive somebody, the command in the Bible is not to reconcile. The command is to forgive.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean that you restore the relationship to what it was before. Sometimes
that relationship's not going to be the same.
It's not going to be the same. And sometimes when something has happened, you can never get back to, quote unquote, that place that you were before. But it doesn't mean that you don't forgive. And I think that sometimes people, because they still remember the events that have happened, they can't seem to kind of completely let them go in some ways, or they still kind of linger out there. They get that confused with forgiveness. Forgiveness simply means I'm not going to strike back at you. I'm not going to repay you like I feel like you have done something to me.
Right.
We may or may not be okay. That would be reconciliation. It's entirely different.
Right.
And reconciliation is important if it can happen.
Yeah.
But it can't always happen. And so forgiveness is not reconciliation. And I think people, if they could understand that,
Yeah.
they would be a little bit healthier. Because relationships, for the most part, aren't healthy anyway. And so one of the reasons that we stink so bad at them is we're trying to force something that really we're not designed to do and really can't happen.
Right.
Because of the way that we're emotionally wired sometimes.
Right. Forgiveness also is not letting the guilty off the hook, but it is moving the guilty from your hook to God's hook.
Yeah.
So, we got to do what we're supposed to do. We leave the consequences up to God.
Well, and don't you think that part of this, though, is where we are in our walk with Christ? Because, again, Jesus tells us to forgive. And so we are supposed to forgive.
Right.
And when I forgive you or you forgive me, we're basically in that moment being obedient and choosing to do what God has told us to do.
Right.
But in choosing to do what God tells us to do, we're also trusting God to be just and balance the books and take care of each of us
Right.
in the way that He best sees fit. And so our unwillingness to forgive sometimes really is a lack of faith on our part that God's going to do His job.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's a scarier problem, because now we're back to, well, we got a bigger problem than forgiveness now. We have a trust issue with God, and that can tank our life. And it's real easy when that happens to blame the event or that person for what started. But what really the problem is, though, is our unwillingness to forgive the event and trust God to handle it.
Right. I got a couple others for you.
Okay.
Forgiveness is not excusing unjust behavior.
Right.
What if the offense is without excuse, Also, forgiveness is not explaining away the hurt, because, it's working through the hurt.
Sure.
So just because we forgive someone, it doesn't mean that the hurt's all gone.
No. If the hurt is real,
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to hurt.
Yeah. Here's another one too, Jeff. Forgiveness is not based on what is fair. Didn't you ever get that one? That just isn't fair. And, whoever told you that life is fair?
Oh my gosh. I never let my kids say that.
No.
That's not fair. Okay, that doesn't fly. No. That's the great news about God, right? We don't get what we deserve.
Right. Thank God.
Thank God life is not fair, right? Because if it were fair, we're in a heap of trouble. But because He's forgiven us, and we're supposed to be like Him or try to be like Him,
right?
Then we have this desire, this need as a follower to be in the business of forgiveness.
Right. So forgiveness is not being a weak martyr either.
Oh no, forgiveness is tough.
You got to be strong enough.
You do.
To be Christ-like.
I completely agree.
Forgiveness is not stuffing your anger, because it's resolving your anger by releasing the offense to God. If you're not asking for God's help, forgiveness is not going to be possible. Because He is the one that we have to lean on the most. I'll be honest with you, Jeff. I've been betrayed by people who were supposed to be my friends. I've had people try to get me fired and all. And man, I tell you, I'm just naturally a fighter, and boy, oh boy. I've had to go to God a lot, saying, God, I'm just having trouble forgiving this person. Yeah. And I need your help, and that might be something you need to do, is to continue being on your knees before God, saying, God, I can't do this without your help. Yeah.
And I think that's where we get the ability to forgive, right? Because,
absolutely.
What a powerful testimony. Because of who Jesus is and how He has worked in our life. When we forgive in that moment, we are putting the heart of God on display for the
Absolutely.
world to see.
Right.
Because I mean, I think most people that know you and know me would simply say, "You guys, I mean, you guys are rats at the heart. You're not that good." And we're not, but yet because of who Jesus is, we're better. When we forgive, we're letting the world see Him through us in a way that, you know what, without Him, we're not going to do it. We're not going to forgive. Why would we forgive?
Right.
Right? I mean, there's no reason to forgive because we live in a world where we always want to hit back, and so I think that's huge. The testimony that we have when we learn to forgive.
There's a lot of hurt involved with, forgiveness, and it's not denying that it hurt. I mean, it's feeling the hurt and then releasing it, and we have to do that through God's help.
Well, and I think when we forgive, I mean, that really is the first step to putting events in that rearview mirror of our life, right? I mean,
Right.
and I mean, even as we're followers, right? We don't put our hand to the plow and keep looking over our shoulder,
Right.
because we're all over the planet. When we don't forgive, what we're always doing is we're always looking back at that event, that person, that place, that time when we were wronged. And as a result, we never seem to be able to move away from it. We never can get completely free of it because we are so busy being fixated on it that it robs us of the joy of the journey that God has called us to. We miss what's right in front of us. We miss the things that are happening around us because we're so busy thinking about, wow, this happened to me and I just can't let it go.
Yeah, I think that's because so many people try to put conditions on their forgiveness. And forgiveness is not conditional.
No,
It is completely unconditional.
like love, right?
Yeah, absolutely. How about forgetting? Forgiveness is not forgetting.
No, it's not. Now, I think people misunderstand misapply that whole idea that we get in Scripture where, when God takes our sin and removes them as far as the east is from the west.
Right.
It doesn't mean that God wakes up tomorrow as a forgetful old man sitting on a throne who has a memory problem.
Right.
I mean, God forgives me for what I do when I sin, when I talk with Him, and I say, God, I'm sorry, forgive me. But God doesn't wake up the next morning and go, oh, Jeff, I forgot you dealt with that. I mean, God knows that, right? God doesn't forget it. That forgetting has to do with not holding it to our account anymore. It's no longer a part of our ledger, right?
Right, right.
I mean, I think that sometimes we get that, we get that messed up because our whole verbiage is wrong about, I have to forget. Well, you're not going to forget.
Right.
If you forget, there's a different problem there. For this. So,
Absolutely.
I think we have probably solved every issue that our audience would ever have about this whole idea of forgiveness.
I think so.
God, we did it. We did it in 29 and a half minutes. Wow.
Maybe 30.
Wow.
Maybe 30.
I mean, there's nothing better than abundant TV, is there?
No.
Good stuff,
there's
right?
not.
Well, listen, I've had a good time as we've looked at this. This is a big topic.
Yeah.
I'm sure at some point we'll come back to it again.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And, I just want to encourage you out there. If you're struggling with it, hey, we've all struggled with it at one time or another, but God is bigger than our problems. And so you keep taking it to Him, and He's going to help you through it.
Yeah. Hey, we got to get out of here. So forgive us, but we got to go.
So don't tap out.